No one went to the CEO's paralyzed daughter's 7th birthday party until a poor boy said, "Can I join you?" And their lives changed forever that day. Before we dive into this heartwarming story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Robert Mitchell stood in the doorway of his mansion's grand living room, his heart sinking with each passing minute. Pink and purple balloons bobbed against the cathedral ceiling, and a magnificent princess castle cake sat untouched on the mahogany dining table. Streamers cascaded from the crystal chandelier like frozen tears. It was supposed to be perfect. Emma's 7th birthday party, the first one they'd attempted since the accident 2 years ago. "Daddy, when are my friends coming?" Emma's voice drifted from her custom wheelchair near the window. Her blonde curls caught the afternoon sunlight as she gazed hopefully toward the circular driveway. Robert's throat tightened. 24 invitations sent to her former classmates, 24 RSVPs that had arrived with polite excuses. "Sorry, we have a family commitment. Johnny has soccer practice. We'll be out of town." He knew the truth. Since Emma's spinal injury from the car accident that claimed his wife Margaret's life, people had become uncomfortable around their family. The wheelchair made them awkward. The reality of permanent disability made them look away. They're running a little late, sweetheart," Robert lied, adjusting his Italian silk tie nervously. Even in his own home, even broken-hearted, the CEO in him maintained appearances. Emma's caregiver, Mrs. Patterson, bustled around arranging party games that would never be played. The clown they'd hired sat in the kitchen, checking his phone, his painted smile fading with each minute. Robert walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking Meadowbrook's most exclusive neighborhood. His pharmaceutical empire had bought them this palace, but it couldn't buy his daughter the one thing she wanted most: friends who saw past her wheelchair. "Mr. Mitchell," Mrs. Patterson whispered, approaching carefully. "Perhaps we should—" A small knock at the front door interrupted her words. Robert's heart leaped. Finally, someone came. He rushed to the ornate double doors, straightening his shoulders, preparing his best grateful smile. But when he opened the door, his expression faltered. A small boy stood on his marble steps, wearing a faded Superman t-shirt with a hole near the collar and jeans that had clearly been patched multiple times. His dark hair was neatly combed but needed cutting, and his sneakers had seen better days. Despite his worn clothes, his brown eyes sparkled with genuine excitement. "Excuse me, sir," the boy said politely, his voice carrying a slight accent. "I heard there's a birthday party here. I live in the apartments down the hill." He gestured toward the low-income housing complex, barely visible through the trees. "I don't have an invitation, but could I come to the party? I promise I'll be really good." Robert stared, speechless. Of all the wealthy children who'd rejected Emma's invitation, this poor child was asking to join them. "What's your name, son?" "Tommy Rodriguez, sir. I'm 7 too." The boy's smile was radiant, despite a missing front tooth. "Is the birthday girl here?" Before Robert could answer, Emma's voice called out excitedly from behind him, "Daddy, is that my friend?" And in that moment, Robert Mitchell realized that sometimes the greatest gifts come in the most unexpected packages. "Come in, Tommy," Robert said, stepping aside as the boy entered the marble foyer with wide eyes that took in every detail of the opulent surroundings. Emma wheeled herself forward quickly, her face lighting up for the first time in months. "Hi, I'm Emma. You're the first kid who's come to my house since." Her voice trailed off, but she quickly recovered. "I love your shirt. Superman is the best superhero ever." Tommy looked down at his patched clothes and grinned, revealing the gap where his front tooth should be. "I'm wearing my best Superman shirt. My grandma says Superman helps people who need help, so I thought it was perfect for a birthday party." "I love Superman too," Emma exclaimed. "Daddy, Tommy likes Superman too." Robert watched in amazement as the two children instantly connected. Tommy didn't stare at the wheelchair or ask uncomfortable questions. He simply saw Emma, a girl who shared his enthusiasm for superheroes. "Would you like some cake?" Emma asked eagerly. "It's Princess Castle cake with strawberry filling, but I bet Superman would like princess cake too." "I've never had castle cake before," Tommy admitted, his eyes growing wide. "My birthday cakes are usually from the grocery store, but they taste just as good when Grandma sings to me in Spanish and English." Mrs. Patterson served generous slices on fine china that hadn't been used since Margaret's death. Robert found himself doing something unprecedented, sitting on the expensive Persian rug with the children instead of maintaining his usual formal distance. "This is the most delicious cake in the whole world," Tommy declared between careful bites. "Mrs. Emma, you must be really special to get such a beautiful cake." "Tommy," Robert said gently, "how did you know about the party today?" Tommy set down his fork politely. "I was walking to the corner store for my abuela when I saw all the pretty decorations through your big window. I stood there thinking, someone must be really special to have such a beautiful party. But then I got sad because I didn't see any other kids, and I thought maybe the birthday person might be lonely." Emma reached over and squeezed Tommy's hand. "I was lonely, really, really lonely, until you knocked on our door. The afternoon flew by like a dream." Tommy pushed Emma's wheelchair around the house, creating elaborate games where Emma was a brave princess, and her wheelchair became a royal chariot that could fly over mountains. They filled the mansion with the sound Robert had missed most, his daughter's uninhibited laughter. As the sun began to set, Tommy checked his worn watch. "I should go home soon. Grandma worries when I'm late." "Will you come back?" Emma asked urgently. "Please say you'll come back." Tommy looked at Robert uncertainly. "If it's okay with your daddy, I'd love to be your friend, Emma." Robert knelt to Tommy's level. "Tommy, you're welcome in our home any time. Emma needs a friend like you, and honestly, so do I." As Tommy walked down the driveway, Emma called out, "Tommy, you made this the best birthday ever." That night, as Robert tucked Emma into bed, she whispered, "Daddy, I think God sent me Tommy as my birthday present." Robert stared out at the lights twinkling in the valley below, wondering if a 7-year-old boy had just reminded them what joy felt like. 3 days later, Robert found himself leaving the office early to drive down the winding hill towards Sunny Meadows apartment complex. Emma had been asking about Tommy constantly, wondering if he was okay, if he got lonely after school. The drive revealed a landscape Robert rarely noticed. His mansion sat atop the hill like a crown, while modest apartment buildings clustered in the valley. The contrast was jarring but enlightening. Sunny Meadows wasn't the disaster Robert expected. The buildings showed their age, but everything was clean and well-maintained. Small gardens bloomed with careful attention, and the playground sparkled with fresh paint and loving repairs. Robert knocked on apartment 2B, feeling overdressed in his expensive clothes. An elderly Hispanic woman opened the door, her presence immediately conveying dignity and warmth. Her silver hair was pulled back neatly, and despite her simple floral dress, she carried herself with unmistakable grace. "You must be Emma's father," she said in accented but clear English. "I am Carmen Rodriguez, Tommy's abuela. My grandson has talked of nothing but his new friend since Saturday. Mrs. Rodriguez, I wanted to thank you for raising such a wonderful boy. Tommy brought more joy to my daughter in one afternoon than she's experienced in 2 years. The tiny apartment was a masterpiece of love over luxury. Every surface sparkled with meticulous cleaning, and family photos covered every available space. The scent of fresh baked bread filled the air, competing with lingering aromas of spices that suggested hours of careful cooking. "Mr. Mitchell!" Tommy bounded from the kitchen table where homework papers were scattered. "Did Emma come with you? Is she okay?" She's at physical therapy, Robert explained, showing Tommy a video Emma had recorded. But she wanted me to give you this. The video showed Emma holding up a drawing. Hi, Tommy. I made this picture of us flying in my wheelchair because you said it was like a magic chariot. I miss you. Tommy watched the video 3 times, clutching the phone like treasure. She drew us flying. Mr. Mitchell, Emma is the most wonderful friend I've ever had. Carmen appeared with coffee and homemade cookies. As they talked, Robert learned the Rodriguez family's remarkable story. Carmen had arrived from Mexico 40 years ago, learning English by watching children's programs and volunteering at church. Mr. Mitchell, Carmen said gently, Tommy tells me your daughter is very brave. The accident that took your wife, it must have been terrible. Robert's throat constricted. It was a drunk driver. Margaret died instantly. Emma's spine was severely damaged. For months we didn't know if she'd survive. And you have been carrying all the pain alone, Carmen observed. Tommy had been listening quietly. Mr. Mitchell, is that why Emma seems sad sometimes? Because you're both carrying heavy feelings? The insight hit Robert like a blow. Yes, Tommy, I think you're right. My abuela says heavy feelings get lighter when you share them with people who care about you, Tommy continued. That's why we pray together every night, for everyone who might be carrying something heavy. We have been praying for your family since Saturday, Carmen added. For healing, for peace, for joy to return to your home. Robert stared at this woman and child who had so little yet spent evenings praying for strangers. Why? Because when you see someone hurting, you help them, Tommy said simply. That's what people do. As Robert prepared to leave, Tommy wrapped cookies in a napkin. These are for Emma. Tell her I made them with extra magic because I was thinking about our friendship. Driving back up the hill, Robert's mind reeled. The Rodriguez family lived in a space smaller than his master bedroom, yet their home radiated more warmth than his mansion had ever known. Over the following weeks, Tommy became a fixture in the Mitchell household, transforming the sterile mansion into something resembling a genuine home. The boy possessed an intuitive understanding of inclusion that surpassed trained therapists. When Emma expressed frustration about not reaching books on high shelves, Tommy didn't offer sympathy. Instead, he created a game where Emma became the commander of their Royal Library expedition, and he served as her knight-errant. Commander Emma, Tommy would announce, I await your orders. Which ancient tome requires rescue today? Emma would giggle and point regally. Sir Tommy, the red book on the 3rd shelf holds the secrets we need. The game transformed frustration into adventure while allowing Emma to maintain agency. She remained the decision-maker, while Tommy simply served as her arms and legs. Tommy, Robert asked one afternoon, how do you always know exactly what to do? Tommy considered this seriously. My abuela taught me to watch people's faces and listen to their hearts, not just their words. Emma's face lights up when she gets to be in charge, so I try to make games where she's the boss. Doesn't it bother you to always be the helper? Tommy shook his head. My papa says the strongest people are the ones who make other people feel strong. Besides, Emma has the best ideas for adventures. Robert marveled at this wisdom from a 7-year-old who understood leadership better than most corporate executives. Tommy had an uncanny ability to sense Emma's difficult days. When phantom pain was bad, or she missed her mother intensely, he would adjust his approach without being asked. Emma, Tommy said gently one gray Thursday, my abuela makes special tea when I'm feeling heavy inside. Want to make some? We could pretend we're brave explorers warming up after a journey through the Ice Kingdom. One evening, Robert overheard them discussing fears. Sometimes I have bad dreams about the accident, Emma admitted. I dream I'm trying to run to save Mommy, but my legs won't work. Tommy was quiet before responding. I have scary dreams too. I dream my papa gets hurt at work. Dreams can be really mean sometimes. What do you do when you wake up scared? I tell my abuela, and she holds me while I cry if I need to. Then she reminds me that dreams are just our hearts working out big feelings, but they're not real. Emma was quiet. I miss talking to Mommy when I get scared. Daddy tries, but he gets worried, and then I feel bad for making him sad. Maybe your daddy gets sad because he misses your mommy too, not because you made him sad. My abuela says grown-ups sometimes need to cry just like kids do, but they forget it's okay. Robert stood frozen outside her door, struck by Tommy's accuracy. The boy had identified something Robert was too proud to acknowledge, that Emma was protecting him just as much as he was protecting her. Tommy, Robert asked later, where did you learn to understand feelings so well? My abuela says feelings are like colors. They're always there, but some people forget how to see them. She taught me to pay attention to the colors around people's hearts. What color do you see around my heart? Tommy studied him thoughtfully. Tired gray, mostly, and worried purple, but the golden color is there too, just harder to see sometimes. My abuela says some people's love gets covered up by their hurts, but it's always there underneath. Saturday morning brought Tommy to Robert's door, but his usual bright demeanor was overshadowed by worry. The boy shifted nervously, fidgeting with his Superman shirt. Mr. Mitchell, I need to ask you something really important, Tommy began formally. My mama and papa want to meet you and Emma, but they're scared you might think bad things about our family. Tommy, why would I think bad things? Because we don't have a big house or fancy furniture or new clothes, Tommy explained, words tumbling out. Papa says sometimes rich people look down on families like ours, like we're not good enough. And Mama worries maybe you're just being nice because you feel sorry for us. The boy's eyes filled with tears. But I told them you're different. You are different, aren't you, Mr. Mitchell? Robert knelt on his marble steps. Tommy, I would be deeply honored to meet your parents. Your family raised you to be exactly the friend Emma needed. I promise I'll never judge your family by what you have or don't have. That afternoon, Robert drove Emma and Mrs. Patterson to the Rodriguez apartment for dinner. Carmen had spent days cooking, and the small space overflowed with incredible aromas. Tommy's father, Miguel, was compact, with shoulders that spoke of decades of physical labor and hands permanently marked by honest work. His handshake was firm, his smile genuine despite obvious nervousness. Mr. Mitchell, Tommy speaks constantly of your kindness. We wanted to thank you properly and meet the young lady who has made our grandson so happy. Sophia, Tommy's mother, emerged from the kitchen wearing her best dress, moving with efficient grace. She knelt beside Emma's wheelchair without hesitation. Emma, Tommy has told us so much about you. He says you're brave and funny and the best storyteller he's ever met. As they shared Carmen's incredible meal, tamales, enchiladas, Spanish rice, Robert learned their remarkable story. Miguel had arrived from Mexico with nothing but determination, working construction while attending English classes at night, sending money home while saving to bring his family north. Sophia had followed 2 years later, working factory jobs while pregnant, attending nursing school with a toddler, building a career caring for others. We may not have money for fancy things, Sophia said, watching Tommy help Emma navigate her wheelchair, but we've given him something more valuable, knowing his worth comes from how he treats others, not what he owns. Tommy is the kindest person I've ever met, Emma said. How did you teach him to be so nice? Carmen chuckled. We taught him that every person has a story, and most people are fighting battles we cannot see. When you remember that, kindness becomes natural. After dinner, Tommy showed Emma his bedroom, a narrow bed, small desk, walls covered with family photos and school certificates. He pulled out a worn shoebox. Emma, these are my special treasures. Inside were simple items: a smooth stone, a thank you card from an elderly neighbor, a pressed leaf, Emma's drawing carefully preserved in plastic. These are better than expensive toys because each one represents a happy memory or someone who cares about me. My abuela says the best treasures are moments when you felt loved. As they prepared to leave, Miguel pulled Robert aside. Tommy comes home talking about you too. He says you seem sad sometimes, even in your beautiful house. Robert's throat tightened. I lost my wife 2 years ago. It's been difficult. We have been praying for your family's healing. May I share something, father to father? Forgiveness of circumstances, of limitations of ourselves, is the only path forward. Your daughter needs to see you finding joy again. Driving home, Emma was contemplative. Daddy, they don't have much money, but they seem so happy. Why? I think they've discovered that happiness doesn't come from having things. It comes from loving people. Emma nodded. Do you think we could learn to be as happy as Tommy's family? Monday morning brought crisis to Mitchell Pharmaceuticals. Robert stood in his glass conference room, facing 12 anxious board members as stock prices flashed red across multiple screens. Robert, the FDA rejection of our arthritis drug just wiped out 6 months of gains, board member Harrison Whitfield declared angrily. We need immediate damage control. What about the Medcore acquisition? Pressed another member. Their heart medication patents could offset this disaster. Robert listened to familiar crisis management, rapid-fire suggestions about damage control, financial maneuvering, strategic responses. When had business meetings become only about protecting profits instead of serving patients? We need strategic layoffs, suggested CFO Marcus Webb. Research and development has been our biggest expense with lowest returns. If we cut the orphan disease division and focus on profitable mainstream medications, that would affect hundreds of jobs and abandon patients with rare diseases who have no other options, Robert said quietly. Webb shrugged. We can't save everyone. We have fiduciary responsibility to shareholders. As discussion continued, Robert found his mind wandering to Tommy's wisdom about planting kindness like flowers, Carmen's gentle insistence that all people deserve dignity. When had his company's mission shifted from healing suffering to maximizing earnings? Robert? Whitfield's sharp voice interrupted. You seem distracted. This company needs decisive leadership, not daydreaming. I'm here, Robert replied, but realized part of him wasn't. Part of him was in a cramped apartment where a family with almost nothing possessed everything that truly mattered. The meeting dragged on for 3 hours. Lawyers discussed liability. Accountants presented cost-cutting scenarios. Marketing outlined public relations campaigns. But notably absent was any mention of arthritis patients who would continue suffering, or moral implications of abandoning research simply because it wasn't immediately profitable. That evening, Robert found Tommy and Emma in the garden, tending small pots of seeds they'd planted. "Daddy!" Emma called excitedly. "Come see how our flowers are growing. Tommy says they're being patient, just like we need to be." Tommy looked up from the soil, dirt smudging his cheek. "Mr. Mitchell, look. The seeds are becoming real plants." My abuela says this is the most magical time, when something small becomes something beautiful. How do you know they're growing properly? Robert asked, kneeling beside them. You can't rush them, Tommy explained seriously. Each plant has its own schedule. They need water, sunlight, good soil and patience. But most importantly, they need someone to believe they can grow into something beautiful. Mr. Mitchell, can I ask you something? At your work, do you help people feel better? Emma said you make medicines. We try to, Tommy, but sometimes business gets complicated. Tommy nodded thoughtfully. My abuela says, when work stops helping people and starts only helping money, it's time to remember why you started. That night, Robert stood in his study, surrounded by awards, celebrating his pharmaceutical empire's success. Stock charts covered his desk, representing years of strategic decisions designed to maximize corporate value. But as he looked at Tommy's flower pots on the windowsill, labeled in Emma's handwriting with names like Hope and Friendship, a different kind of decision began forming. His phone buzzed with messages from board members pressuring him to announce layoffs and cost cuts. The business press would analyze Mitchell Pharmaceuticals' response, and Wall Street would watch for decisive leadership. Yet staring at those small pots where invisible seeds were becoming visible flowers, Robert found himself asking, what if there was another way to lead? What if Tommy's family's wisdom could guide a pharmaceutical company towards something better? The question that would change everything. What would Tommy do? Tuesday morning, Robert Mitchell walked into the Mitchell Pharmaceuticals boardroom carrying something no one expected, a child's drawing of two stick figures holding hands under a rainbow, carefully preserved in a plastic folder. He placed it on the polished mahogany table beside thick financial reports and legal documents that represented millions of dollars in corporate decisions. The boardroom itself was a monument to pharmaceutical success. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, original artwork worth more than most people's homes, and leather chairs that cost more than the average monthly salary. It was designed to intimidate and impress, but this morning it felt more like a cage than a palace. "Gentlemen, ladies," Robert began, his voice steady with newfound purpose that surprised even him. "I've made a decision about our response to the FDA rejection and our future direction as a company." Harrison Whitfield leaned forward expectantly, his expensive suit perfectly pressed, his confidence radiating the smugness of someone who believed he'd won before the battle began. "Excellent, Robert. The layoffs and cost-cutting measures we discussed yesterday should restore investor confidence quickly." "We're not laying off anyone," Robert interrupted, his words falling into the room like stones into still water. "Instead, we're doubling down on research and development, particularly orphan diseases and medications for underserved populations." The boardroom erupted in shocked murmurs and angry whispers. CFO Marcus Webb nearly dropped his coffee, staining his tie with dark liquid that matched his expression. "Robert, that's financial suicide. Our stock is already tanking. Wall Street will crucify us." "Actually, Marcus, it's the opposite. We're returning to our founding mission, healing people, not just maximizing profits for shareholders who never see the faces of patients we could help." Patricia Henley's perfectly manicured fingers drummed impatiently against the table, her engagement ring catching the light like a weapon. "Robert, have you completely lost your mind? Shareholders will revolt. We'll face lawsuits. The board will never support this insanity." Robert looked around the table at faces he'd known for years, people who'd helped build his pharmaceutical empire but had somehow lost sight of why they'd entered healthcare in the first place. "I've been thinking deeply about what success really means. A very wise 7-year-old recently taught me that when work stops helping people and starts only helping money, it's time to remember why you started this journey." "A 7-year-old? Whitfield's voice dripped with contempt and disbelief. "You're basing multi-million-dollar corporate strategy on advice from a child. Robert, this is a boardroom, not a kindergarten classroom. This child has demonstrated more wisdom about human dignity, compassion, and true leadership than this entire boardroom combined." Robert's voice grew stronger, fed by conviction he hadn't felt in years. "We're going to prove that a pharmaceutical company can be both profitable and principled, both successful and ethical." Webb pulled out his tablet frantically, fingers flying across spreadsheets and financial projections. "The numbers absolutely don't support this fantasy, Robert. Compassion doesn't pay dividends to shareholders. Good intentions don't fund research and development. Maybe we've been measuring completely the wrong dividends, Marcus. Maybe we've been so focused on quarterly earnings that we've forgotten why people become doctors and scientists in the first place. Robert outlined his revolutionary plan with growing passion. Mitchell Pharmaceuticals would establish a foundation providing free medications to families who couldn't afford them. They would continue researching rare diseases regardless of market size or profit potential. They would partner with community clinics in underserved areas, bringing healthcare to people who had been forgotten by an industry obsessed with profit margins. How exactly do we fund this corporate charity project? Henley asked sarcastically, her tone suggesting she thought Robert had suffered some kind of mental breakdown. Do you plan to print money in the laboratory? By cutting excessive executive bonuses, reducing marketing budgets for drugs that sell themselves through medical necessity, and eliminating unnecessary luxury expenditures like this boardroom's monthly fresh flour budget that costs more than most families spend on groceries. Robert's smile was grim, but determined. We'll discover that helping people is remarkably good for business when you measure success correctly. The meeting devolved into chaos. Threats of board revolts, shareholder lawsuits, and corporate coups. But as Robert walked to his corner office afterward, passing employees who looked at him with new respect and curiosity, he felt lighter than he had in years. His assistant handed him an urgent message with worried eyes. Your daughter called from school, Mr. Mitchell. She wanted you to know immediately that Tommy's grandmother collapsed and is in the hospital. The family is asking for prayers. Robert's transformation was about to be tested sooner and more dramatically than he'd ever expected. Robert found Tommy in the pediatric waiting room at St. Mary's Hospital, sitting alone in a chair designed for adults, his small frame making him appear even younger and more vulnerable. The boy's favorite Superman shirt was wrinkled and stained with tears, his usually bright eyes red and swollen from crying, but he sat with the stoic dignity Robert had come to associate with the entire Rodriguez family. The waiting room buzzed with the quiet desperation common to hospital spaces. Families clustered around coffee machines, whispered conversations about insurance coverage, and the perpetual anxiety of people whose lives had suddenly been placed in medical hands beyond their control. Tommy, Robert said gently, sitting in the adjacent chair and matching the boy's serious demeanor. Emma told me about your grandmother. How is she doing? Have the doctors told you anything? Tommy's lower lip trembled slightly, but his voice remained steady, a 7-year-old displaying more emotional control than many adults Robert knew. The doctors say her heart is very, very sick, Mr. Mitchell. They use big words I don't understand, but I can see in Mama's eyes that it's really bad. The boy paused, struggling with emotions too large for his small body. Papa is trying to be strong, but I saw him crying in the bathroom when he thought no one could see. Mama keeps praying and holding Abuela's hand. But what if she goes to heaven like your wife did? What if I never get to tell her I love her again, or show her my good grades, or help her make cookies? Robert's chest tightened with familiar grief and newfound protective love for this remarkable child who had brought so much light into their lives. Tommy, have you been able to see her, to talk to her? For a few minutes, but she looked so small and fragile in that big hospital bed with all the tubes and machines beeping around her. She didn't look like my strong abuela who teaches me everything. Tommy wiped his nose with a crumpled tissue that had clearly seen much use. But you know what? Even being so sick, she smiled when she saw me and said, Mijo, remember what I taught you about planting flowers. Remember that kindness keeps growing even when we can't see the gardener anymore. What did she mean by that, Tommy? That the good things we plant in people's hearts live forever, even if something happens to us. That every time someone is kind because they learned kindness from us, part of us keeps living in the world. Tommy's voice grew stronger, filled with the wisdom Carmen had instilled in him. She made me promise to keep taking care of Emma's friendship and to keep being kind to everyone, no matter what happens to her. Robert marveled at this child's resilience and emotional intelligence. Even facing the potential loss of his beloved grandmother, Tommy was thinking about others, planning how to honor her teachings, demonstrating the kind of character that corporate leadership seminars tried unsuccessfully to teach. "Mr. Mitchell, can I ask you something really important? It's about money, and I know that's grown-up stuff, but—" Tommy's voice dropped to a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might make his fears more real. "The doctors said Abuela needs a special heart medicine that costs more money than our family has ever seen. It's called something like Cardio Max, and it could save her life." Robert's blood turned cold with recognition and growing horror. "Tommy, what exactly is the name of the medication? Do you have it written down?" Tommy carefully extracted a crumpled paper from his pocket, a prescription slip covered with medical terminology in a doctor's hurried handwriting. Papa tried to understand what the doctor was saying, but the numbers made him go very pale. "The medicine costs more than Papa makes in 6 months of construction work." Robert studied the prescription, his worst fears confirmed. Cardiomax 7, one of Mitchell Pharmaceuticals' most effective cardiac medications, developed at enormous cost over 5 years of intensive research. It was incredibly successful at treating heart conditions like Carmen's, but priced at levels that made it accessible only to wealthy patients or those with premium insurance coverage. The bitter, devastating irony wasn't lost on him. While he'd been sitting in boardrooms debating corporate strategy and profit margins, the family who'd taught him about true wealth faced losing their matriarch because they couldn't afford his own company's life-saving medicine. "Tommy, I need to make some very important phone calls right away. Will you be okay here for a few minutes?" 25 minutes later, Robert burst through the doors of Carmen's hospital room, where Miguel and Sofia maintained their vigil beside her bed, their faces etched with exhaustion and desperation. The woman who had shown him such warmth, wisdom, and grace looked fragile beneath the medical equipment, but her eyes still held their familiar sparkle of intelligence and love. "Mr. Mitchell," Miguel said in surprise, rising from his bedside chair with obvious confusion, "you didn't need to come here. We know you have important work." "Miguel, Sofia, there's nothing more important than this." Robert turned to the attending physician who was checking Carmen's chart. "Dr. Patterson, I understand Mrs. Rodriguez needs Cardiomax 7 treatment, is that correct?" "Yes, it's the optimal treatment for her condition, but unfortunately, the insurance coverage is limited and the out-of-pocket cost." Dr. Patterson shook his head sympathetically. "We're exploring alternative treatments that might be more financially feasible for the family." Robert pulled out his business card with hands that trembled slightly with emotion. "Doctor, I'm Robert Mitchell, CEO of Mitchell Pharmaceuticals, the company that manufactures Cardiomax 7. Mrs. Rodriguez will receive the full treatment protocol immediately, at absolutely no cost to the family. Furthermore, I want this hospital administration to know that any patient who needs our medications but can't afford them should call my office directly." Sofia gasped audibly, her hands flying to cover her mouth. Miguel's weathered hands covered his face as overwhelming emotion crashed over him like a wave. The strong man who'd worked construction for 20 years to provide for his family was finally allowing himself to break down. Carmen's weak but unmistakable voice cut through the room's emotional intensity. "Mijo, you didn't need to do this for us. We are just simple people. Mrs. Rodriguez, your family saved mine from loneliness and despair. You taught us what love actually looks like. This is the least I can do." Robert's voice was thick with emotion he'd kept buried for too long. "Besides, someone very wise recently taught me that when you see people who need help, you help them. That's what people do. Carmen's smile lit up the sterile hospital room like sunrise. Tommy has been a very good teacher, no? But as Robert left the hospital that evening, his phone was buzzing incessantly with increasingly urgent and angry messages. His board members had called an emergency meeting. The pharmaceutical industry press had somehow gotten wind of his radical policy changes. His decision to provide free medication to Carmen and his public commitment to help other patients was about to become very expensive in ways that went far beyond money. The emergency board meeting felt like a corporate tribunal designed for public execution. Robert faced not just his 12 regular board members, but also several major shareholders who'd flown in emergency flights from New York and Los Angeles, their expressions ranging from deeply concerned to openly hostile and vengeful. The boardroom's usual atmosphere of controlled power had been replaced by something that felt more like a courtroom, where Robert was simultaneously judge, jury, and defendant. Expensive suits couldn't hide the predatory energy crackling through the air. Harrison Whitfield stood at the head of the conference table like a prosecutor presenting his case to a hanging jury, his usually perfect composure replaced by barely controlled fury. "Robert, your recent decisions have put this entire company in serious jeopardy, offering free medications to anyone who claims they can't afford them. Do you have any comprehension of the financial implications?" "I understand we'll finally be living up to our company mission statement," Robert replied with forced calm, though his heart was racing. "The one prominently displayed in our lobby that says we exist to heal, hope, and help humanity. Mission statements are marketing tools designed to make us look good to the public, not actual business strategies," snapped major shareholder Eleanor Blackstone, whose investment firm owned 15% of Mitchell Pharmaceuticals and wielded influence far beyond her official position. "Your emotional response to your daughter's friendship is clearly clouding your professional judgment to a dangerous degree." Robert felt his carefully controlled temper beginning to flare, but forced himself to remember Tommy's calm dignity in the face of his grandmother's crisis. "My judgment has never been clearer. We have an unprecedented opportunity to prove that ethical business practices and long-term profitability aren't mutually exclusive. They're actually complementary." CFO Marcus Webb stood with a thick folder of dire financial projections, his usually steady hands trembling slightly with either anger or fear. "Robert, I've run comprehensive analyses on your foundation proposal. If we provide free medications to even 10% of patients who can't afford current pricing, we'll lose over $40 million annually. That's not sustainable for any company, regardless of good intentions." "Oi. And if we don't help those patients, Marcus, how many will die unnecessarily? How many families will face bankruptcy trying to afford medications that cost us pennies to manufacture? What's the real cost of those lost lives when measured against our moral obligations?" Robert's voice grew stronger with each word. "That's simply not our responsibility as a corporation," Whitfield argued, with the cold logic of someone who'd never watched a child worry about losing their grandmother. "We're a pharmaceutical company with fiduciary duties to shareholders, not a charity organization with unlimited resources to heal the world's problems." "According to whom?" Robert's voice carried newfound conviction that surprised even him. Who decided that helping people and making reasonable profits had to be mutually exclusive? Maybe the real problem is that we've been thinking far too small about what success actually means. Eleanor Blackstone leaned forward like a predator preparing to strike. "Robert, I've been authorized by the major shareholders to deliver an ultimatum. Either you immediately abandon these idealistic policies and return to sound, proven business practices, or we'll call for an emergency vote of no confidence in your leadership." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Robert could lose everything: his company, his fortune, his ability to provide for Emma's future medical needs and education. The safe choice was obvious to everyone in the room. Back down, apologize for temporary insanity, return to business as usual. But as he looked around the table at faces hardened by years of putting profit above purpose, faces that had forgotten why they'd entered healthcare in the first place, Robert heard Tommy's innocent voice echoing in his memory. When work stops helping people and starts only helping money, it's time to remember why you started. I understand your concerns completely, Robert said finally, his voice steady despite the enormity of what he was risking. But I won't abandon this path. I've seen what's possible when we remember that pharmaceutical companies exist to heal people, not just enrich shareholders. If you want to remove me as CEO, call your vote. But I believe there are enough people in this company who remember why we became healers, instead of just businessmen. The room erupted in arguments, threats, and desperate attempts at negotiation. Board members shouted over each other while shareholders calculated potential losses, and lawyers discussed the mechanics of corporate coups. 3 hours later, after heated debates that revealed the soul of corporate America, the vote was finally called. By the narrowest possible margin, 7 votes to 6, Robert retained his position as CEO. But the victory felt hollow and temporary. He'd won this battle, but might lose the war. The dissenting board members made it absolutely clear they would fight his every decision, question his every move, and work actively to undermine his leadership. As Robert drove home through quiet suburban streets that evening, his mind reeling from corporate warfare and uncertain about his company's future, his phone rang with Tommy's excited voice, filling the car like sunshine. "Mr. Mitchell, great news! Abuela is getting better. The medicine is working exactly like the doctors hoped, and they say she can come home in just a few days." Despite everything, the corporate warfare, the financial risks, the deeply uncertain future, Robert found himself smiling genuinely for the first time in weeks. At least one thing had gone exactly right. But he had no idea that the real test of his convictions was just beginning. 2 weeks later, Robert stood in his home study reviewing increasingly troubling financial reports when Emma wheeled in with Tommy trailing behind, both children displaying an unusual seriousness that immediately caught his attention. The study itself reflected Robert's old priorities: expensive leather-bound books that were more for show than reading, awards celebrating pharmaceutical industry achievements, and photographs from corporate events where everyone smiled but few seemed genuinely happy. "Daddy, we need to tell you something really important," Emma said, her voice carrying a gravity that seemed far too mature for her 8 years. "Something that might change everything we thought we knew." Tommy nodded solemnly, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by the kind of seriousness children display when they understand they're dealing with adult matters. "It's about my family, Mr. Mitchell. There's something very important we haven't told you, not because we wanted to keep secrets, but because we didn't think it mattered until now." Robert set down his financial reports, giving the children his complete attention. Their unusual behavior suggested this conversation would be significant. "What is it? You both look like you're carrying the weight of the world." Emma glanced at Tommy for encouragement before continuing. "Tommy showed me some old papers in his abuela's room when we visited her in the hospital. Special papers she keeps locked in a wooden box. Papers about his grandfather who died before Tommy was born. My abuelo died when I was just a baby, so I never got to meet him," Tommy explained, his voice filled with the kind of reverence children reserve for family legends. "But abuela keeps all his important papers in a special box that smells like cedar wood and old memories. She showed them to me because she wanted me to understand our family history and why education is so important." Robert waited patiently, sensing this revelation carried significance he couldn't yet understand. Tommy carefully pulled a worn envelope from his pocket, treating it like precious treasure. Mr. Mitchell, my abuelo. His full name was Dr. Eduardo Rodriguez. He wasn't just a regular doctor. He was a scientist who spent his whole life creating medicines for people who couldn't afford expensive treatments. The words hit Robert like lightning striking clear sky. A pharmaceutical researcher. Are you certain? Yes, sir. Abuela said he spent every day in his laboratory, working late into the night, trying to find ways to make medicines that poor families could afford. He had this huge dream about healing people who didn't have money for the fancy treatments that rich people could buy. Emma's eyes shone with excitement as she understood the implications. "Daddy, show him the picture. You have to see this." Tommy carefully extracted a faded photograph from the envelope, handling it with the reverence of someone displaying a holy relic. The image showed a distinguished man in a white laboratory coat standing beside sophisticated research equipment, his kind, intelligent eyes remarkably similar to his grandson's. Abuela says Abuela would be so proud that his grandson became friends with someone who makes medicines too. She thinks maybe it's not a coincidence that we found each other. Maybe it's part of some bigger plan we don't understand yet. Robert stared at the photograph, his mind racing with possibilities and connections he'd never imagined. "Tommy, do you know what specific research your grandfather was working on when he died? Something really important about heart medicine for children who couldn't afford the regular treatments. Abuela says he was very close to finishing his research when he got sick with cancer and couldn't continue working." Tommy's voice dropped to a whisper. "She says he died, knowing his work wasn't finished, but believing that someday someone would complete what he started." The pieces clicked into place with stunning, almost mystical clarity. Robert rushed to his computer, fingers flying across the keyboard, as he searched through pharmaceutical research databases with growing excitement and disbelief. Within minutes, he found exactly what he was looking for. "Tommy, Emma, come look at this screen immediately." Displayed in black and white was a research paper titled Pediatric Cardiac Treatment Protocols for Underserved Populations by Dr. Eduardo Rodriguez, published 30 years ago in a respected Mexican medical journal. The methodology described was not only revolutionary for its time, but exactly what Mitchell Pharmaceuticals needed to develop affordable heart medications for children worldwide. "Your grandfather," Robert said quietly, his voice filled with awe and growing excitement, "may have provided the key to solving one of our industry's biggest research challenges. His work could help thousands of children who currently can't afford life-saving cardiac treatments." Tommy's eyes widened with wonder and pride. "Really? You mean Abuelo could still help sick kids even though he's in heaven with the angels?" "More than that, Tommy. If we can build on his research foundation, we could create the affordable medication program I've been dreaming about. Your grandfather's work could prove conclusively that helping people and running a successful business can work together beautifully." Emma clapped her hands with pure joy. "It's like magic. Tommy's family keeps helping our family in the most amazing ways." But as Robert studied Dr. Rodriguez's research more carefully, absorbing the elegant solutions to complex problems, he realized this discovery would provide powerful ammunition for both his supporters and his enemies within the company. The question that would determine everything was simple but crucial. Would his board see this as validation of his new direction, or as another excuse to remove him from power? Tommy seemed to read his thoughts with that uncanny insight that had characterized their entire relationship. "Mr. Mitchell, my abuela always says that when you plant good seeds with love and patience, you never know how big and beautiful the flowers will eventually grow. Maybe Abuelo planted seeds of kindness that are just now ready to bloom into something wonderful." The boy was absolutely right. "But Robert, was about to discover that some people would do absolutely anything to prevent those seeds from growing into the garden of healing they were meant to become. The news of Dr. Eduardo Rodriguez's groundbreaking research spread through Mitchell Pharmaceuticals like wildfire, but not in the way Robert had hoped. What should have been celebrated as a major breakthrough instead became the center of a corporate firestorm that threatened to destroy everything he'd worked to build. It started with seemingly small acts of sabotage, research files mysteriously disappearing from computer systems overnight, key scientists suddenly resigning to join competitors with suspiciously generous offers, and carefully planted negative stories appearing in pharmaceutical trade publications, questioning Robert's reckless experimentation with unproven foreign research. The attacks grew bolder and more personal. Anonymous sources suggested Robert had suffered a mental breakdown following his wife's death. Industry analysts questioned his fitness to lead a major pharmaceutical company. Stock prices continued their downward spiral as uncertainty about the company's direction spread through financial markets. The breaking point arrived on a Thursday morning when Robert walked into his office to find private security guards waiting with Harrison Whitfield and Eleanor Blackstone, their faces set with the grim satisfaction of people who believed they'd finally won a long-fought battle. "Robert," Whitfield announced coldly, his voice carrying the authority of someone who thought he now controlled the company's destiny. "We're implementing emergency measures to protect shareholder interests and restore stability to this organization. Effective immediately, you're suspended from all duties pending a comprehensive board review of your recent decisions and mental fitness to lead." "You can't do this," Robert replied. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew they possessed the corporate power to orchestrate this kind of coup. While he'd retained his CEO position in the earlier vote, the board had enough collective influence to create paralysis. "Actually, we can and we are," Eleanor announced with cold satisfaction, reading from a prepared legal statement that had obviously been crafted by expensive lawyers. "We have extensively documented a clear pattern of increasingly erratic behavior over the past several months." Adutum, she enumerated the charges like a prosecutor seeking the death penalty. Basing major business decisions on advice from children rather than financial experts, implementing costly charity programs without proper board approval, pursuing research based on 30-year-old papers from a foreign scientist with questionable credentials, and most recently, making public commitments that could bankrupt this company. Dr. Rodriguez was a brilliant researcher whose work could revolutionize pediatric cardiac treatment for underserved populations worldwide, Robert protested, his voice rising with frustration and growing anger. "Dr. Rodriguez was a small-town Mexican doctor whose grandson has obviously manipulated you through your disabled daughter," Whitfield sneered with cruel precision. "Face the facts, Robert. You've been played by experts. That family targeted you from the very beginning." Robert's anger flared like gasoline meeting flame. "How dare you suggest that a 7-year-old child face reality?" Eleanor interrupted with the ruthless efficiency of someone delivering a killing blow. "A poor Mexican boy mysteriously appears at your daughter's birthday party with no invitation, befriends her with calculated precision, introduces you to his conveniently sick grandmother who desperately needs expensive medication, and suddenly you discover his grandfather's supposedly revolutionary research. The whole thing is obviously an elaborate long-term con game designed to exploit your grief and loneliness." The accusations hit Robert like physical blows, each one designed to make him question everything he thought he knew. Could he have been manipulated? Had his loneliness and Emma's desperate need for friendship blinded him to an elaborate scheme? But then he remembered Tommy's genuine tears in the hospital waiting room, Carmen's authentic wisdom about kindness and dignity, Miguel's quiet strength in the face of poverty, Sophia's selfless compassion for others despite her family's struggles. No one could fake that kind of consistent, deep-rooted goodness. "You're completely wrong about the Rodriguez family," Robert said with growing conviction, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was facing. "They showed us what real wealth actually looks like. If you can't see the authenticity of their character, you're the ones who've lost all perspective on what matters in life." "Security will escort you from the building immediately," Whitfield announced with obvious satisfaction. "Clean out your personal office items. The board will vote on your permanent removal Monday morning, and I can assure you the outcome is already decided." As Robert packed his personal belongings under the watchful eyes of security guards who'd once greeted him respectfully, his phone buzzed with a text message from Emma that cut through his despair like sunlight through storm clouds. "Daddy, Tommy's family wants to invite us for Sunday dinner at their apartment. Can we go? I have something really important to tell you that I think will make everything better." Despite everything, losing control of his company, facing potential financial ruin, having his judgment and sanity questioned by people he'd trusted, Robert found himself smiling genuinely for the first time in days. Some invitations were infinitely more important than board meetings. Sunday dinner at the Rodriguez apartment was a revelation that reminded Robert why he'd fought so hard to change his company's direction. Despite news reports calling them con artists and opportunists, despite having their character assassinated by people who'd never met them, the family welcomed Robert and Emma with exactly the same warmth and genuine affection they'd always shown. "Mr. Mitchell," Carmen said gently, her voice still weak from her recent hospitalization but strong with conviction, "we heard about your troubles at work. We are deeply sorry that helping us has caused you such pain and difficulty." Helping you didn't cause anything," Robert replied firmly, looking around at faces that radiated authentic love and concern. "It revealed what was already there, the fundamental difference between people who genuinely care about each other and people who only care about accumulating money and power." Tommy had been unusually quiet during dinner, his normally animated conversation replaced by thoughtful observation. Finally, he spoke with the seriousness that always preceded his most important insights. "Mr. Mitchell, I need to tell you something really important about the real reason why I came to Emma's party that day." Robert's heart skipped a beat. Despite his faith in the family, Whitfield's accusations had planted seeds of doubt. Had there been calculation behind Tommy's initial approach? "The truth is," Tommy continued with the kind of honesty that only children can deliver, "I was walking to the store for Abuela when I saw Emma through your big window, and she looked so incredibly sad and lonely. My Abuela always taught me that when you see someone who genuinely needs a friend, you become their friend if you possibly can. That's the only reason I knocked on your door, because Emma needed someone who would see how special and wonderful she really is." Emma reached over and hugged Tommy tightly, tears streaming down her face. "And that's exactly why I have something important to tell you too, Daddy. Tommy's family didn't change us or trick us. They helped us remember who we really are underneath all the money and big houses." As Robert looked around the small apartment filled with love, laughter, and unshakable moral values, he realized Emma was absolutely right. Tomorrow, he would fight the most important battle of his professional life. But tonight, surrounded by people who measured wealth in love rather than stock prices, he was exactly where he belonged. Monday morning arrived like Judgment Day. Robert walked into the Mitchell Pharmaceuticals boardroom for what everyone expected to be his final meeting as CEO. But he wasn't alone. Tommy sat beside him in a chair that dwarfed his small frame, wearing his best clothes and carrying a folder that would change everything. "This is highly irregular," Harrison Whitfield protested as the board members filed in, their faces set with the cold satisfaction of people preparing for an execution. Children don't belong in corporate boardrooms. Tommy Rodriguez has something to say that directly relates to this company's future, Robert replied calmly. He deserves to be heard. Eleanor Blackstone's perfectly manicured fingers drummed impatiently against the mahogany table. We're not here to indulge fairy tales, Robert. The vote is a formality. Your removal as CEO has already been decided by the major shareholders. But as Tommy stood on his chair to address the room, something unexpected happened. The boy's presence, his dignity, his obvious intelligence, his quiet courage, commanded attention in a way that surprised even Robert. My name is Tommy Rodriguez, he began, his 7-year-old voice clear and strong. You don't know me, but you've been talking about my family for weeks. You think we're bad people who tricked Mr. Mitchell. But I want to tell you the real truth. He opened his folder with ceremonial care. My abuelo was Dr. Eduardo Rodriguez. He spent his whole life trying to make medicines that poor families could afford. When he was dying, he told my abuela that someday someone would finish his work and help sick children everywhere. Tommy pulled out his grandfather's research papers, now professionally translated and analyzed. Mr. Mitchell's scientists looked at Abuelo's work. They say it's brilliant, that it could help thousands of kids who are sick but can't afford medicine. Board member Patricia Henley leaned forward despite herself. What exactly are you suggesting, child? I'm not suggesting anything, Tommy replied with startling confidence. I'm telling you what my abuela taught me. She says when you plant flowers, you don't plant them for yourself. You plant them so everyone can enjoy the beauty. He looked directly at Whitfield, his young eyes holding wisdom that seemed impossible for his age. Mr. Mitchell planted flowers when he decided to help my family. But you want to cut down all the flowers before they can bloom and make the world more beautiful. The room fell silent. Even the most hardened board members seemed affected by the boy's sincerity. Robert stood, placing a protective hand on Tommy's shoulder. Tommy's grandfather's research isn't just scientifically sound, it's revolutionary. Combined with our resources, we can develop affordable cardiac medications that will help millions of children worldwide. This isn't charity. It's good business with a conscience. Show them the real numbers, Daddy, came Emma's voice from the boardroom doorway. She wheeled in, followed by Mrs. Patterson and an unexpected guest, Dr. Sarah Chen, the renowned pediatric cardiologist from Children's Hospital. Emma, what are you doing here? Robert asked in surprise. Tommy and I called Dr. Chen, Emma announced proudly. We wanted her to see Abuelo's research because she takes care of kids with heart problems who can't afford expensive medicine. Doctor. Chen approached the conference table with professional authority that commanded immediate respect. Board members, I've spent the weekend reviewing Dr. Rodriguez's research protocols. They represent a breakthrough that could reduce pediatric cardiac medication costs by 70% while maintaining full therapeutic effectiveness. She placed her own folder on the table. Children's Hospital has already committed to partnering with Mitchell Pharmaceuticals if you proceed with this research. 5 other major pediatric centers have expressed similar interest. The market potential is enormous, not because you're charging high prices, but because you'll help so many more patients. CFO Marcus Webb frantically pulled out his calculator. If we could reduce production costs by that margin while expanding market access, the profit potential is actually higher than our current model, Dr. Chen continued. You'll help more people and make more money. It's not idealism, it's intelligent business strategy. Harrison Whitfield's confident expression began to crack. But the boy, the family, surely this is all too convenient. Tommy's small hand raised politely. Mr. Whitfield, my abuela wants to meet you. Once. She says angry people are usually just scared people who forgot that someone loves them. She makes really good cookies, and she says cookies make everything better. The absurdity of a 7-year-old offering cookies to resolve corporate warfare broke something fundamental in the room's hostile atmosphere. Several board members actually smiled despite themselves. Eleanor Blackstone studied the research documents with growing amazement. Dr. Rodriguez's methodology, it's genuinely brilliant. If this research had been published in American journals instead of Mexican ones, it would have revolutionized our entire industry decades ago. That's exactly my point, Robert said quietly. We've been so focused on protecting our profits that we've ignored innovations that could help us serve humanity better. Tommy's family didn't con us. They reminded us who we were supposed to be. The vote, when it finally came, was unanimous. Robert would remain as CEO, and Mitchell Pharmaceuticals would immediately begin developing Dr. Rodriguez's affordable medication protocols. But the real victory came afterward, as board members approached Tommy with genuine curiosity and respect, asking about his family and his dreams for the future. 6 months later, Robert stood in the same boardroom, now decorated with children's artwork from patients who'd received free medications through the Rodriguez Foundation. The company's stock had reached record highs, not despite their charitable work, but because of it. Tommy burst through the doors, his report card clutched triumphantly in his small hands. "Mr. Mitchell, Emma, I got all A's, and my teacher says I might grow up to be a scientist like my abuelo." Emma wheeled over to examine the report card with obvious pride. "Tommy, you're going to discover medicines that help everyone, just like your grandfather wanted." "Actually," Tommy said with his characteristic thoughtfulness, "I think abuelo already discovered the most important medicine of all." "What's that?" Robert asked. Tommy's gap-toothed grin lit up the entire room. "Kindness. When people are kind to each other, it heals everything. Hearts, families, and even big companies." Robert looked around the boardroom that had once felt like a corporate battlefield, now filled with laughter, hope, and the promise of healing that extended far beyond medicine. Carmen had been right. When you plant flowers of kindness, you never know how beautiful the garden will become. Outside the windows, the city sprawled below, full of families like the Rodriguez clan who needed both healing and hope. And for the first time in his life, Robert Mitchell knew exactly what his pharmaceutical empire was meant to accomplish. The greatest prescription, it turned out, had been written by a 7-year-old boy who understood what adults had forgotten: that success isn't measured in stock prices, but in the number of lives you touch with love. The end